Oftentimes when people think about the start of Nintendo's origins in gaming, their first thought is the NES, maybe the Game & Watch. But really, when we go even farther back to Nintendo first messing with home consoles, it all started with the TV game 6. Soon we'll be able to get our hands on the newest iteration of Nintendo's hybrid console, the Switch, with the Nintendo Switch OLED model, and to celebrate, I want to take a look back at all the systems that got us here today, starting with a look at all of their home consoles. I am also planning a video covering all of their handhelds, so if you don't want to miss out on that, make sure to subscribe. Released back in 1977, the Color TV Game 6 was Nintendo's first introduction to the home console market. Before then, they had dipped their toes a little bit in gaming by releasing some arcade cabinets, but the TV Game 6 was the first time they started bringing gaming into people's homes. And it was a different system from what we now kind of traditionally understand a Nintendo console to be. You would just hook it up to your TV, put some batteries in the system itself, and start playing its amazing variety of 6 games. Okay, actually it was really just one game, it was all Pong, but there were 6 different versions of it that you could switch between. And this became the basis for how Nintendo started working on home consoles. There were 4 more versions of the TV game that were released over time, including an upgraded version of the Game 6 called the Game 15. We also got a driving and brick breaker one, and finally ending with the computer TV game. While this series of systems was only released in Japan, the initial momentum it had built up for Nintendo proved to them that getting into gaming was a good idea, and was discontinued in 1983 when they released their true breakout system, the Family Computer, better known as the Famicom or the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Family Computer 登場.
Coming to the US in 1985, the NES helped restart the games market that a lot of people had become very uncertain of after the games crash of 1983. So many games had flooded the market and a lot of titles that just no one really liked, that for a time, most retailers were basically swearing off the concept entirely. To help navigate and get around these fears, Nintendo took their Famicom system, which was already doing well in Japan, and advertised it to the US as not really a game system, but more of a fun toy. This is why when you look at a lot of the old promotional art and the way that the NES was advertised in the US, a lot of more focus was drawn to things like the stuff it came with, like Rob the Robot, and the games were just sort of a backseat to it, even though that was absolutely what the actual focus was.
To experience the Nintendo Entertainment System comes with Rob, Zapper, Control Deck, 2 controllers, Gyromite, and Duck Hunt.
This is also why the NES looks very different from the Famicom that it was based on. Given Nintendo's obvious current fame, this plan worked, introducing a lot of people to new games that were a lot more engaging and some of the biggest franchises that we still have today, including Super Mario Bros., Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Kirby, and more. While most people picture the original versions of the Famicom and the NES, these systems did have a couple different revisions that only came out in select countries. In Japan, there was the Twin Famicom, which supported both Famicom cartridges and floppy disks for playing games, as well as the Sharp Nintendo TV, which was both a television, but also a Famicom system that you could play built in as part of it. Meanwhile, in the US, we got one revision of the NES that came out very late in its life cycle with the Type 101. This was a smaller, more kind of fun-looking design, a little closer to the Famicom, but still different, and most importantly, switched it back to being a top loader. As amazing and fun as the NES was, this was just the start of Nintendo's hit systems, leading into their next set of consoles with the Super Famicom in 1990 in Japan, and in the US, the SNES in 1991. Like with the Famicom and NES before them, the SNES and Super Famicom did have different designs and names for their respective countries, although they were much closer in design aesthetic than previously. Both were top loaders, both had controller ports in the same location. There was just a decidedly different approach to the designs of each system, with the Super Famicom being a little more rounded in the edges and more subdued in its colors with a focus on gray, whereas the SNES was a little boxier and added pops of color with purple. These systems were homes to some of the best games of their time, and in all honesty, the SNES is my favorite retro system because it marks the beginning of the golden era for RPGs. Yes, there were some great non-RPG games. We got Super Mario World, more Legend of Zelda, Super Metroid, a lot of great titles, but it was also the home to Final Fantasy IV, 5, and 6, or at least 4 and 6 in the US, Chrono Trigger, one of my favorite games of all time, and even Mario got the RPG treatment with Super Mario RPG. While the system had a fun campaign war with the Genesis, where Sega was really pushing that they were the cooler system, and did a great job of arguing this, by the way.
No, over here! I like Genesis, and it costs a lot less.
At the end of the cycle, it's pretty indisputable that for its generation, the SNES was the top system, something that had begun to make Nintendo very proud. which is also why they started running into problems with their next system, the N64.
Hello!
Released in 1996, the N64 did away with the different regional models of the system, favoring just a single visual design for all of its versions. Though down the line they did focus on having a lot of color variation, something they didn't do with the previous systems, including of course the Fantastic series, which featured all kinds of really cool see-through looking designs, something that to this day I really want them to tap back into for their current systems. Named after its 64-bit processor, the N64 was the first Nintendo system to introduce 3D graphics, just following behind the PlayStation, which Nintendo happened to accidentally help create.
Hey, plumber boy, mustache man, your worst nightmare has arrived.
It also introduced one of the wackiest controllers ever with the N64 controller, a triple-handled grip design that just never really ended up feeling quite right. While this system continued to have a lot of great first-party games like Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Star Fox 64, lots of games that are arguably some of the best in their franchises, it began to hit a bit of a wall when it came to third-party support. While the NES and SNES had had a ton of third-party support from companies like Squaresoft, Capcom, Konami, Nintendo slowly began to alienate a bunch of these companies. While they did continue to work with Nintendo to an extent, a lot of them ended up moving a lot of their major releases over to their new competitor, the PlayStation. While the N64 had Nintendo's name power and felt like a more traditional system with its use of cartridges, it was PlayStation's embracing of newer technology with CDs that was able to store much more information on a disc, giving developers a lot more freedom to do what they wanted to do on the hardware. This signaled the beginning of a bit of a rough patch for Nintendo, at least for their home consoles, that continued on with their follow-up system, the GameCube. Releasing in 2001, the GameCube moved on from cartridges to discs and introduced what is still one of my favorite Nintendo controllers of all time, thanks to its unique ABXY layout. The GameCube's predicament has always been really interesting for me history-wise because, as many people know, the PS2 was just the absolute king of that generation. It is still the top-selling system of all time. Yet despite this fact, the GameCube was actually more powerful. However, like the N64, it ended up running into the same problem it had of game storage. While the GameCube did move on to discs instead of traditional cartridges, they still went with a proprietary smaller disc design that could not carry as much data as the DVDs that the PS2 had moved on to. Like the N64, the GameCube had some fantastic first-party games, but third-party support was still on the weaker side. And since this was the system that came out after the Dreamcast's sad decline, this is also when Sega started releasing games on the GameCube, which was absolutely mind-blowing if you grew up during the time of Genesis versus SNES. The GameCube did have a silent model revision that removed some port options in the back, but never really had any major model revisions that changed the look of the system, the one exception being the short-lived Japanese exclusive, the Panasonic Q, which was a combination GameCube DVD player. Like the N64, the GameCube did end up just not selling super well during its time, but Nintendo was able to turn this loss into a victory with their follow-up system of the Wii. Originally released in 2006, the Wii was a kind of turning point for Nintendo after two systems in a row just not really performing up to snuff. And the major decision here was, instead of focusing on trying to compete with other consoles in terms of power, they rather focused on changing the way people interact with and play games with a focus on motion controls. And wow, did this work out. It was really interesting being a gamer during the time of Wii versus 360 and PS3, because this is when Nintendo really ended up, I think, getting kind of its own reputation of being something not directly competing with the other two. But a lot of that was oftentimes cast in the light of being, oh well, Nintendo is a system for little kids and soccer moms, which to some extent was actually pretty true, because the Wii sold an insane amount of systems, opening up the audience to way more people than its previous consoles had. Despite being a lower power system that looked nothing like its competitors, the Xbox 360 and PS3, the Wii absolutely destroyed them in sales, selling over 100 million units in sales, beating out both those systems, and still currently holding the record for most sales on a Nintendo home console, though the Switch is very quickly catching up to this. One big selling point of the Wii was, of course, its low cost, with the system eventually even getting cheaper thanks to a newer model that looked nearly identical but dropped GameCube support. Also, for some reason, near the end of the Wii lifecycle, they released the Wii Mini, which was a smaller system. It actually looked kind of cool, but of the many features it dropped, the most confusingly, no online support. The Wii absolutely dominated for 6 years until Nintendo decided to try doing a new system once again, upping the graphics power, giving HDMI support, and trying a new innovative gimmick that didn't actually work out quite as well, with the Wii U. I want to preface all of this by saying right away that I absolutely loved the Wii U. The concept of what was possible with the Wii U tablet combined with on-screen gameplay, effectively being a giant DS that you could separate the screens of, was super cool to me. I'm a sucker for asymmetric game design, and there were some truly great ideas showcased for this with its initial launch software of Nintendo Land. However, none of that really worked out right. Very few games actually made interesting use of the Wii U tablet, evidenced by the fact that a lot of them have been ported to the Switch now and work perfectly fine with a single screen. And the system's very similar name to the Wii and similar look led a lot of people to believe that the Wii U wasn't actually even a new system. There are a lot of people, even until this day, who think the Wii U is just the tablet component itself and that was an accessory, that was an add-on to the Wii. No, it was a whole new system with new hardware that was more powerful. And what I think makes its absolutely horrible sales figures even more painful is the fact that it had some truly amazing first-party games and exclusives. And the best evidence of this fact is that, once again, most of its major games are now on the Switch and are selling amazingly. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is still the top-selling Switch game there is ever, and that was a Wii U game. The confused messaging and failure of the Wii U to sell caused Nintendo to move on very quickly, cutting its lifespan short by introducing a new system only 4 years later in 2017, which is of course the Switch. This is, to me, and I think many others, the big comeback moment for Nintendo. Because sure, the Wii did absolutely great in terms of sales numbers, but the reputation and story being told at the time I think was a little more mixed. Whereas with the Switch, while you still hear a little bit of that kind of kids and family rhetoric every now and then, there's a much more broad acceptance of the fact that it's truly just a great game system. As Nintendo's hybrid console, it has collapsed some of the best aspects of their home consoles and handhelds. And from its home console side, it of course has the ability to be docked so that you can play it on a big screen at home using a Pro controller, playing multiplayer, sharing a screen on that TV, or even on the go if you're using it on its little tabletop setup mode. And of course, continuing support for motion controls similar to the Wii, which is still shown off in some major games like most recently Skyward Sword. While it shares DNA with both home consoles and handhelds, one aspect it has heavily taken over from the handheld side is a heavier focus on multiple system revisions, having received not only the launch Switch, but a revised red box Switch with better battery life and cooling, the Switch Lite, which was the smaller version, not offering the dockable ability, but at a more affordable price point, and soon, the new OLED model Switch that goes for a little more money in exchange for a larger screen that is OLED featuring more vibrant colors. Not to mention a fixed kickstand design that I am so thankful for and can't wait to actually try out. The Switch has been doing so well, in fact, that it's very much on its way to dethrone the Wii as Nintendo's top-selling home console, though it still has a bit more of a journey to do if it wants to beat out the handhelds. With more great games coming out this year and a new model, I cannot wait to see what else this system has in store. As always, guys, if you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, and if you haven't subscribed yet, maybe think about doing that too. Again, I am planning on doing a follow-up companion video to this one, focusing on Nintendo's handhelds.